Welcome to Truth Behind History. The stories are real, the impact is lasting. Most people think they already know how the Roman Empire fell. You ask around, and the answer's almost automatic. It was the barbarians, right? Invading Germanic tribes swept in and crushed the mighty empire. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410. The Vandals hit next. And finally, in 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire officially fell when a Germanic chieftain deposed the last emperor. And while that story is technically true, it's not the whole truth. What if I told you that Rome was already collapsing from within long before the first barbarian ever crossed the border? In this video, we're going to explore a different side of the Roman collapse, one that isn't about brute force or battlefield defeats. It's about internal decay, a slow, creeping rot that hollowed out the empire from the inside. Long before the fall came the dysfunction, economic mismanagement, bloated bureaucracy, political overreach, and a growing reliance on state handouts to keep the people pacified. So here's the real question: was Rome doomed not by swords and sieges, but by its own unsustainable system? Stick with me, because the deeper we go, the more we'll see how the empire's greatest threat wasn't outside its walls, but deeply embedded within them. Let's rewind to what many consider Rome's golden age. Under Emperor Trajan, around the early 2nd century, Rome was at its absolute peak. The empire stretched from the sands of North Africa to the misty forests of Britain, and from the Atlantic Ocean to the banks of the Euphrates River. That's about 5 million square kilometers under Roman control. Pretty impressive, right? This period is often called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, because for nearly 2 centuries, the empire enjoyed relative stability, prosperity, and military dominance. But here's the catch: Rome's economy wasn't built on innovation, or free exchange, or productivity in the way we might think of a strong economy today. It was built on conquest. The empire needed to expand in order to survive, plundering gold, collecting taxes, and enslaving people from newly conquered territories. Expansion was the engine, but once the borders reached their natural limits, when there was no more land to easily take, the engine sputtered. Rome had become a victim of its own success. No more conquest meant no more fresh revenue. And unlike a modern economy that can adapt and grow internally, Rome didn't pivot. Instead, it stalled. At the same time, running such a massive empire wasn't easy. Beneath the appearance of control were deep logistical nightmares. Communication delays, inconsistent governance, and local rebellions all chipped away at the illusion of efficiency. Managing such a vast and diverse empire, without modern technology, was like trying to keep a massive machine running with frayed wires and missing parts. Eventually, something was bound to snap. So yes, Rome looked strong from the outside, but inside, its foundations were already starting to crack. Now let's talk about money, because if you want to understand the fall of Rome, you can't ignore its economy, and at the heart of that economy was a little silver coin called the denarius. When the denarius was introduced in 211 BC, it was the real deal. High-purity silver, trustworthy, stable. It was accepted across the empire and helped facilitate trade, pay soldiers, and fund infrastructure. In many ways, it was the backbone of Roman economic life. But over time, that backbone started to deteriorate. Enter Emperor Nero, famous for his flair, his fire, and his financial tinkering. In 64 AD, Nero began the first major debasement of the denarius. He reduced the silver content from around 96% to just 90%. Now that may not sound like much, but it was the start of a dangerous trend, one that would only get worse. Why did Nero do it? Simple. He needed more money. Rather than raise taxes, which could stir unrest, it was easier to mint more coins with less silver. It was inflation through sleight of hand. Fast forward to the 3rd century, and the situation becomes dire. By 270 AD, the denarius was barely recognizable. It contained less than 5% silver, practically worthless. And with trust in the currency collapsing, so did Rome's economy. Merchants refused the coin. Trade slowed. Prices skyrocketed. Hyperinflation set in. And with money no longer holding its value, many regions reverted to barter. Imagine trying to run an empire when even your currency has given up. This was more than a financial crisis, it was a collapse of economic confidence. And it all started with just a few percentage points shaved off a silver coin. As the empire expanded and its economy faltered, the Roman state tried to compensate the only way it knew how, by growing even bigger. More officials, more rules, more layers of bureaucracy. You see, governing a massive territory wasn't just about soldiers and roads. It meant paperwork, and lots of it. The Roman government developed a sprawling administrative system to oversee taxes, laws, census data, food distribution, land records, you name it. But the bigger that system grew, the more it cost to maintain. It was like trying to plug leaks in a sinking ship by building more decks. And who paid for all this? Not the elites, not the imperial court, but the people, especially the middle and lower classes. Small farmers, craftsmen, artisans, they carried the heaviest tax burden. Some were taxed so severely that they had to abandon their land or businesses altogether. In fact, things got so bad that many Romans made a desperate choice. To escape the crushing taxes, they voluntarily tied themselves to wealthy landowners, binding themselves and their families to the land. These individuals became known as coloni, and while it wasn't slavery, it wasn't freedom either. It was a slow slide into something resembling serfdom, and it laid the groundwork for the medieval feudal system that would follow centuries later. So what do we see here? A government that kept growing in size and control, while placing more and more burden on the very people it was supposed to protect. The result wasn't stability, it was exhaustion, and when people lose hope in the system, they stop trying to support it. So how do you keep a restless, overtaxed population from rising up? Simple, you distract them. The Roman elite perfected this strategy, and history remembers it as bread and circuses. That phrase wasn't just poetic, it was literal policy. The government handed out free grain, sometimes even olive oil and wine, to the urban poor. And while their stomachs were full, their eyes were glued to the spectacles. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus, gladiator battles in the Colosseum, animal hunts, theatrical plays, mock naval battles. Rome knew how to entertain. These weren't small affairs, either. Tens of thousands packed into arenas, cheering on brutal competitions that blended sport with savagery. But this wasn't generosity, it was control. By keeping the people fed and entertained, the emperors kept them quiet. They didn't have to address the deeper issues, the economic rot, the corruption, the loss of freedom, as long as the public had enough distractions. The bread dulled the hunger, the games dulled the mind. Over time, this system created a population that was less engaged, less politically active, and more dependent on the state. Citizens became spectators, and the once proud Roman civic spirit, the idea that Romans were guardians of liberty and justice, gave way to passive consumption. It's a warning worth remembering. When a society turns to entertainment and handouts as substitutes for reform and responsibility, it may feel stable in the short term, but beneath the surface, the cracks keep spreading. By the time we reach the 3rd century, the Roman Empire isn't just declining, it's unraveling. Between the years 235 and 284 AD, Rome cycled through 26 emperors. 26. Most of them didn't die of old age. They were assassinated, overthrown, or killed in civil wars. The throne became a revolving door of short-term rulers, each more desperate than the last to cling to power. And with every violent transfer of authority, Rome's legitimacy weakened further. At the same time, the economy was spiraling. Remember that little coin, the denarius? By now, debasement had reached catastrophic levels. The silver content was nearly gone, and inflation was out of control. Prices skyrocketed. People stopped trusting money altogether. In some areas, trade collapsed so badly that citizens reverted to bartering, exchanging goods directly because currency no longer held value. With coordination breaking down and wealth evaporating, Rome attempted one last lifeline: reforms. Emperor Diocletian stepped in with a heavy hand. He issued strict price controls and froze wages. He also locked people into their professions, trying to force economic stability by decree. But these coercive measures didn't fix the problems, they only created new ones. Black markets exploded. Farmers stopped bringing grain to market because the prices weren't worth the effort. Class rigidity worsened, and social mobility, once a strength of the Roman system, came grinding to a halt. So now you've got political chaos, a worthless currency, and a suffocating economy strangled by the very reforms meant to save it. The empire wasn't just stumbling, it was gasping for air. As the 4th century rolled in, Rome was bleeding, economically, politically, and militarily. And yet, the empire still appeared to function, still marched, still ruled. But underneath that surface, it was barely holding together. In a last-ditch attempt to restore order, Emperor Constantine introduced a new gold coin called the solidus. It was a financial band-aid, a temporary fix meant to restore confidence in the currency after years of hyperinflation. And to be fair, it worked, for a while. The solidus was stable, reliable, and accepted across the empire. But here's the thing, it didn't solve the underlying issues. Rome still had a bloated bureaucracy, high taxes, and deep economic dysfunction. A new coin couldn't change that. And while the economy was cracking, the empire itself split, officially this time. In 395 AD, Rome divided into eastern and western halves. The east had more wealth, more people, and better defenses. The west? It was struggling. That division wasn't just about convenience, it revealed just how uneven the empire had become. The infrastructure in the west told the story clearly. Roads fell into disrepair, aqueducts cracked, cities crumbled. The old Roman pride in engineering and civic upkeep faded. When invaders came, Goths, Vandals, Huns, they weren't just confronting a stronghold. They were picking apart a corpse. The invasions didn't cause the collapse. They exposed it. Because when your economy is unstable, your leadership is fragmented, and your population is dependent on broken systems, all it takes is a push. So, what can we learn from all this? First, let's be clear, Rome didn't fall overnight. There was no single villain, no dramatic explosion, no grand finale. Rome's collapse was slow, painfully slow. A long decline stretched over centuries. It wasn't the sack of the city in 410 AD or the final emperor's removal in 476 AD that destroyed Rome. Those were just the final cracks in a structure that had been rotting from the inside for generations. The warning signs were everywhere. Monetary corruption through coin debasement, a bloated bureaucracy that grew faster than the economy could support, crippling taxes that crushed the productive class, a population that stopped participating in civic life and instead relied on handouts and distractions. All of it pointed to a society in decay. And here's where it hits close to home, because these aren't just ancient problems. Distorted incentives, central overreach, civic disengagement. Sound familiar? No civilization is immune to decline. And when the foundations start to erode, when money loses its value, when institutions rot, when people stop believing in the system, collapse doesn't come with a bang. It comes with a long, quiet unraveling. So the next time someone tells you Rome fell because of barbarians, remember this: the barbarians didn't destroy Rome. Rome destroyed itself. Thanks for watching. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out our other episodes here on Truth Behind History, where we dig beneath the surface and uncover the patterns that shaped our world.